Hey, what's up? My name is Chris, and welcome back. We are in the midst of building out this landing page, and hopefully you've been following along. If not, you can go ahead and grab the code in the description and jump right in with us. Now, I realized when I was looking at this section, which we need to build out, I realized we never actually finished the styling here. I got so excited about finishing the last video and getting that ready that I left that alone. Now, let me just mention something, and I'm going to come over here under the services and go ahead and start adding in that styling that I left off. As I quickly add this markup, let me just mention to you that I do have a community improvements branch, and that's really meant for us to improve it together. And there are oftentimes, like I noticed, I didn't add my H3 or H2 classes last time after going on about that. And rather than fixing everything I don't do right, I usually go back into that community improvements branch and kind of update it how I would like to do it if I had more time or if I had done it the right way the first time. But I also love it when people fork and then make their own suggestions. We build better when we do it together. And what I did here, just so you can see here, is I added both the surface icon and the surface icon SVG, just some styling for that, colors, sizes, that kind of stuff. Now, let's go ahead and start the server up so we can actually see the difference. And let's come down here. And I think I see here, I never actually added service. I added whatever that word is. All right, there we go. So now we're done with the styling there. Let's go ahead and work on that slider section next. Now, you guessed it, that's going to be another component. So let me come over this way. And let's see, below this services here, we're going to add something called reviews. I'm going to come up top here. Hopefully you know the drill by now. Like I said, we're going to get really used to doing this in Astro. I've got this. I'm not going to save it so that it doesn't kill our server. And I'm just going to come over here, grab this, copy it, and we'll call this reviews. And then just like before, I'm actually going to just add some data to my data folder. This is going to be called reviews here as well. So let's duplicate this. Call this reviews. And I've just gone ahead and added this from my clipboard. And you can see what I've done is I've given everyone a name. I've had a random quote assigned to them. And then I've given them all an avatar. Now I got those avatars from the same system we used in Figma called UI faces. So all you have to do is grab something like this and then you can generate random amounts. Now I need to add all of these in my public folder because again, the public folder is for anything that you're not going to transform. So it's actually just sitting, when I publish this, it will be kind of live on the server. That's why when I reference them here, I'm not saying public/assets. It's just exactly after whatever the URL would be, /assets, and then the image. I've got those off screen. Let me grab them. Oh, and I dropped those in the wrong place. Let's put these inside of assets. If you want to grab those exact ones, you can grab them from the repo below. All right, I'm going to go grab, jump over here. We've got that set now. We've got our data being pulled in. And I should mention too, when it comes to this data up top, anything you import or things like that, you actually have top level await. So if you're fetching from a server or something like that during build, you actually have top level await, which is another nice little touch of Astro. And before we start building out this reviews component, let's come back over here and I'm going to add one more folder here in SRC. We're going to call this JavaScript. And then I'm going to add a file in here, and this time we're just going to call it reviews.js. Just to make sure it's working, let's console log, hi, I'm a working script. Oops, as I break it, I'm a working script. There we go. All right, so we've got that set, and that means I should be able to come over here. Actually, let's leave that open so I don't have to find that later. And now let's come down here, and I want to show you one other thing about referencing scripts in Astro. Now, so far we've written 2 inline scripts because they've been really small, but usually you're not going to always have inline scripts, obviously. And if you had components that all reference the same script, if you leave them in line, then every time they're referenced on your page, you're going to have another script tag. And so there are a bunch of different ways to get around that. One of them is when you're writing that script tag, if you do it in line here, you can just add the word hoist right here. And Astro will basically package all those up and add them together. And even if you have the same component referenced multiple times on your page, it will only include that script once globally on the page. All right, the other thing here, though, is that you can actually reference a script. If I come over this way, let's come down here, hoisted scripts here, you can also reference them like this. So actually built-in JavaScript files, and that's what we're going to do. So let me copy and paste this over this way, and that's not what it's called. And again, this would be a relative path, so I actually need to go up, and then down to my JS, and then over to my reviews. So we've got that. Let's go back to, let's see where we don't need services. And let's come over here and save this. And then go over here, open up the console, And I'm not seeing this yet, but let's come down here and make sure that we actually got this section coming in. It is. And let's just make sure. So we've got reviews right here. That's right. Up here, we've pulled that in. Reviews Astro over here. This is the right file. Let's make sure it's actually updating live. So let's call this reviews. Oh, I have it hidden, so I can't see it. Let's do that now. Okay, yeah, there we go. So it is coming in properly. Now we do have some data here that isn't referenced properly because we're on a different file. Let's get rid of that and see if that changes anything. Nope. Oh, I look over here. Look at that. I've got a filter on. It's been working the whole time. All right. The last thing I was working on, evidently I didn't clear out that filter. Okay, so there we go. False alarm. Now let me actually undo this and re-add in this map. We're going to use this just to kind of scaffold out what we're going to do. Now the first thing I need to do is change this to a section with the class of review wrapper. And then I'm going to have a blur on this. And then I've got another div called reviews container and container extra small. Now the reason I'm doing it this way is I need this wrapper to go all the way across the screen, but I need a container that will keep everything stuck to the middle. And this container itself is going to have 4 different sections. It's going to have those 2 buttons for either side. So if I go back to the finished code over here, it's going to have these 2 buttons right here. And then it's also going to have this section right here. And then it will also have these indicators. The way we're going to build out this section is all of these reviews are going to be stuck together and actually set as flex children of one parent called reviews. As we drag that thing to the right or to the left, the children behind it will slide in as they need to. So let's come back over this way, and I'm going to add those 4 things we need. So we've got our button that has a class of review button, and it will also have a class of grid small and review button prev. Now it will indicate to us that it's the previous button there. I'm going to go ahead and just expand that out, and then I do need to add a couple other things here. So let's come in here, and I also need to add an ARIA label because, again, this doesn't have any text, so I need to be able to say what it does. So we're going to say previous review. And now inside here, I want an icon, that left-leaning icon. So let's come back up here to our icon thing, and let's look for a chevron. And this is the one I want right here, chevron left. I'm going to grab that code here. And again, we're going to use Astro icon and just say name like that. And I'll set a width here to 50. Now at the very bottom, I'm going to have another button. It's going to be very, very similar, except I'm going to grab, let's see, this prev. These are both going to be next. And then this will say next review. And this will say right. All right, so in the middle then, I need that div with the class of reviews. This is going to be the parent that drags those children around as we add them. Now there is actually a little bit of complexity there, so let's leave that alone. I'm going to come down here first and just add one more thing, and this is in the container, the review container, because the buttons and these indicators are going to be position absolute. So here I've got an indicator container, and now we just need to map over some stuff. And you know what? I've been keeping all this down here. I think it's going to be better for us to just, let's kill this thing right here. And then I'm actually going to move this all the way up. We can just go ahead and keep that in because this tells what the section is about. And let's just do our map live here. So inside here, we've got our data.map, and then I'm going to grab the review is what we're going to call it. So each of those items we'll call a review. And in parentheses here, and I'm going to add each of these as buttons. Now they're going to have a class of indicator. And then I also want to add one other class depending on if it has a certain property on it. So if I head back to, let's see, my reviews JSON right here, you'll notice that I had active true on this first one. And I'm just going to use that to apply an active class. So in brackets here, I'm going to have an if statement more or less. So review question mark dot. So if the review that's coming through has a property of active on it, then I can use this double ampersand. This is a little trick here and say add the class of active. So only that one will have the class of active on it. Then I'm going to close that off and it should work just fine. So let's save that and come over this way. There's my little dots, they're real tiny, and there's the arrows. Now let's come back up here, and we need to go ahead and add in all of those reviews. So in brackets here, again, because we need to tell Astro that we're doing some kind of templating, I'm going to take my data and map over this, and we'll call this a review here. And inside parentheses, I've got a div with the class of review, and then grid small. And what do we have in here? Well, we've got the image up top, so let's grab an image tag with our src pointing to, again, not in quotation marks here, the review that's being passed in .avatar, which is just that property with the image link. And then for the alt, let's set that to review name, so review.name. And then I do need to give it some classes, so we're going to call it actually just one, review avatar. Next, we've got a paragraph with the class of review content. And you guessed it, in the middle, this is going to have review.content. That's the property that lives on it. And then finally, we're going to have one more paragraph with the class of review name. And remember, we set up that text gradient color. That uses our gradient, and it basically applies a clipping to it so we can make text look like it has a gradient. Then I am going to add a class of h3 to this. And inside here, review.name. So if we did that all correctly and I save, there we go. We get all of the different people. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they're stacked up that way. Now, something that might seem a little odd at first is we actually don't need 5, we need 7. And you might be like, well, wait, there's only 5. How are we going to get 7 out of this? Well, the reason is because as we transition between all of these, if we start moving around, we want them to slide, but then finally when it gets to the very end, we actually want it to look like it's looped around. So I need to actually duplicate the last item over here, and I need to duplicate the first item over here. So if I move over here, we're going to actually come to this last item, or the first item in the array, that's a duplicate of the last, and then remove the transition and jump all the way to over here, and now we actually truly are on this last image. Now I've got a duplicated first image over here. Now if you're like, what in the world just happened? Just follow along, I'll show you as we go. But what we need to do, in other words, is duplicate or clone the last image at the start of the array and the first image here at the last of the array. Now we've already done all the work for that. That means we can just take this and duplicate it up and duplicate it down. So now I've got 3 sections like this. And let's go here first of all to this first one. All I want to do is take a slice of this, and that will be based off my length of my array. So I want to duplicate the last item. So I'm going to say data.length -1.map. So it's only going to grab the very first one, and that will duplicate the first one. And now if I come down here, same kind of thing. We're going to say slice, and I want 0. So the very first item in my array, I want to duplicate it at the end like that. There are other ways to do this, but I figured since we've already got the templating out, let's just copy it down and quickly do it like that. So now here we go. I've got the last one showing up first. Here's the really true first one in my array. Go all the way down, and then that's the true last one in my array, and here's the first one duplicated again. Now as we set this out in the CSS, I think that will make a little bit more sense. Speaking of CSS, I think that's what we've got next, so let me come over here, and let's try not to leave off anything this time. So reviews is that section. And you might remember we've got that wrapper on everything, reviews wrapper. And we'll set the background color here to HSL var of background. And then margin will be up and down 0, but left and right I actually want it to have some margin. Now I didn't quite find something in open props that worked for me, so I'm going to take one of their variables, var of size fluid 2, and just multiply it times -1. Now I'm not seeing that take effect, so let's just make sure I've got that named correctly. Reviews wrapper over here. This should be reviews container. This should be me not typing while I'm talking. All right, review button, that should work there. Let's see, we also need to fix up the other button then. All right, back to what we were doing, the CSS. I've got my reviews wrapper, and here I've got my after and my before, because remember, this is what has that blur on it. And just like before, I want to customize this a little bit. If I come over here and I open this up, it's going to be kind of hard to see exactly where this stands, but there's actually a blur behind this. So maybe let's do this. Before we adjust that, let me grab the reviews container. Let's make a couple other adjustments so you can actually see this take place live. So this is the kind of the thing that's going to cap everything in the middle. So I want it to have an overflow hidden and a position of relative, because the buttons and the indicators are going to be positioned relative to this container. Now the width here, I want to actually be a calculation, and I want it to be 100% view width minus my var size fluid 2. And that actually reminds me, up here I had a negative margin because originally the way I had done this, I needed that to be over. I don't think I need that anymore, but let's leave that there for now just in case I'm wrong. It's definitely happened before. So let's grab the HSL and grab the background color here. And then finally, before we work on that after pseudo element, let me grab the reviews and just say display a flex. And that should stack them all up. So now you can actually see what's going to happen. We've got this blur back behind everything. And yeah, I don't think I need that margin because it already is over on the side. Let's see what happens if we kill this. Hey, that works. Okay, so let's come back to here. What I actually want is to inset this so that left and right, it's not quite as expansive. So I'll just say inset inline. Same as saying right and left and setting properties on this separately, but I'm going to say 20%. So that pushes it more towards the center, and I think it'll have a more dramatic effect. All right, now we're quickly running out of room. Let me just pull that down here so we've got a little bit more space. And let's add a couple other things on this reviews so that we're down to just one review showing on the page. So I'm going to want a margin here, and this is up top. We want size fluid 4, and then 0. That's left and right, and then size fluid 5, and that will be to the bottom. Let's keep everything in the center with text align center. And then I want to set a transform here of translate x, negative 100%, and then transition, transform will be 300 milliseconds ease in and out. So there it goes, it moves all the way over. Now why am I moving it over 100%? Well, if you'll remember, we actually have all these children, and we're going to make them stretch the full width. And the very first item that I want to show is actually the second item in the array because I've duplicated my last item as the first item in the array. So let's come down here and let's grab all those with a class of review and say flex 1, 0, 100. And there it is. There's the item I'm concerned about. Now let me zoom out just a touch so you can see all that. Now this should be actually capped by this overflow hidden, which means this is reviews container. No? Did I spell that wrong? Let's come back. Where's that at? Reviews containers. I mean, okay, let's do that. Now we come back over this way, and I do actually want to take this off so that we can see what's going on. So here we go. We've got this over here, and then all those stack up over that way. Now, because we've got a wrapper around the entire site with an overflow hidden, we can't see any further that way. So maybe I need to, let's remove that as well, just so I can show you scrolling-wise where they're at. So the rest of them are stacked this way. We're just going to drag the parent div over to the left or to the right, and it will show the right one we need to. Because we've got all those reviews themselves set to flex 100%, they're always going to try to take up the full width of their parent, which is this container over here that's holding here and translated x 100%. Hopefully that makes sense, but we're going to keep going, and you're going to see this as we move through it, so I think it'll make even more sense as we keep moving. Now let's go ahead and grab the review avatar. This needs to have a max width here of var size fluid, and 5 is what we're looking for. There we go. And then I do want it to have a border radius, and of course this has to be a circle, so let's make it 50%. And there we go, that looks a lot better. I've also got review content, and I don't want this to ever quite be the full width because we're going to have the buttons coming up on the side. So there's a couple different ways we could fix this, but I'm going to say max width of 80% for that content. Now that we've got those set, let's go ahead and work on the position absolute items. So those are our buttons and our indicators. So that had a class of review button, and again, position of absolute. Now, I do want these to be forward in front of everything else, so let's set a z-index here of 10 or something like that. Then I'm actually going to stretch them from the top to the bottom of the container. And you can see them there. And the reason I'm doing that is so that way you can click anywhere over there, especially on mobile, and you don't have to hit the little tiny icon. Let's set the background color, actually just the background altogether, to none. And then we'll set the border to none. The background color, I actually do want a color on this so that you don't see the things moving behind them. And this actually needs to be my background variable. The color themselves, remember those SVGs are going to take on the color of the parent. So I want this to be muted. And then I'm going to have a padding here of var size 1 and a width of var size fluid 4. And that way they change as we get going. Larger screen sizes, they'll be bigger buttons basically. Finally, these are buttons, so let's go ahead and add a cursor of pointer, and then a transition, all 300 milliseconds var. And then here's another cool thing we can do with open props. I haven't been referencing this the entire time just so that you don't have to see me constantly switching back and forth, and this video series wouldn't take forever. But you can see they've got these different animations you can use, and they're kind of cool. You can do like shake or whatever. They've also got a bunch of timing functions that you can play with. So here's some ease ones. This is the ones we're going to play with. You can see they kind of squish over that way as you click them. And so that's what we're going to do when it comes to these buttons. So we'll do ease, squish, and 2. Let's jump back over here. Now we've got different review buttons depending on which side we're on, and we need to position them differently depending if it's a right or a left one. So let's say review button. And that had a class also of prev on it like that. We're going to say this one needs to be left aligned of 0, so all the way over on the left, which it already is by default. And then let's copy this down because now we want to provide a hover and a focus state. And with this new little is selector, it's pretty easy to add both of these at the same time. So let's say left. Now by default, it's already all the way over on the left. So when I click it or hover over it, I actually also want it to move more to the left. So I actually need a negative left here. And I don't have a variable for negative left, but because with calcs, you can just take any custom variable like this, like size 1, and just multiply it times -1, and that will move it over to a negative variable. Let's also then take our color, and we're just going to have a HSL of text. So it's going to change color slightly as we hover over it. Now the nice thing is I can just grab all this and duplicate it down and update both of these to say next, and then this needs to be right. And once again, I think we've got a naming problem, so let me come back over here, review button. I think that looks right. Well, let's see what's going on here. So let's click this and grab one of these buttons here. So that looks definitely to be getting some styling. And you know what? I think I just didn't move this over to the right. All right, there we go. Now I do see a problem here where it's actually not in the middle. And I think, let me come back over here. Let's remove this background color, or maybe let's set this to white. Yeah, you can see it's not quite going to the top. I'm not seeing automatically what the problem is here, so let's see. It may just be that I'm oddly zoomed in. Let's see. Nope, good try. So let's just retrace here. Okay, so this right here isn't as high as it needs to be. There we go. So if I do put back on my overflow hidden, it goes right back to the middle. Right now we want that on, and that way we can see these other reviews. All right, so let's zoom back out now that we know what's going on, and let's add our final CSS, and then we'll move over to the JavaScript. So let's do our indicator container like that, and then inside here we're gonna have position of absolute, and this will be left 50%. Bottom var will be size 5, so get it off the bottom of the page there. And then I do want these things to be flex aligned, so next to each other. And the justify content should be in the center because I want them to be all the way on the bottom in the center together. We'll throw a gap on here of var size 3. And then finally, I need to actually translate it. So if I put them up there, you see that there they are. Now they're kind of positioned oddly, again, I think because of that overflow hidden being taken off. But let's set transform, translate X, and this needs to be -50%. Now you might have noticed that they were 50% as in the start of them were right here. So now we're transitioning them back or translating them back 50% of their own width. All right, next let's come down here and add something for the actual indicator. Here we're going to have the background be set to transparent. The border will be set to 0.15 em, solid, and then my HSL of text, alt, and then we'll have a border radius here of 50% to make them circles. We probably should zoom in here so you can actually see what's going on. Oh, that's disturbing. Let's move down there. There you go. Okay. I'll have a padding here of 0.3 rem. And then for the height, I want var size fluid 1. There they are. And then cursor pointer. Hey, Chris from the future in one more video here, but just to note that I left off a property. If you want these things to stay circles on larger screens, you need to have aspect ratio 1/1. So make sure to add that to the indicator class. Okay, back to the future. And then we do need one different thing for our indicator with the class of active. Remember, we set that on our very first one just through the templating. Here we go, background, HSL. We want this to be text alt. So it moves from transparent to actually having the same color as the border. With the overflow taken off and I zoomed in oddly, we're getting some clipping there, but that will be removed. But now you can see I should have shown you that's the hover state we worked on. All right, so see how it kind of jumps over that way? The other thing I want to do really quickly is I've got some weird naming things here. I'm not sure why I did it this way. So this should probably be a review avatar like that. Maybe that was the only weird one I saw. So let's come back over here to my reviews and avatar. Here we go. So all these review avatars, I'm going to grab one and hit Command-Shift-L. That will select them all and put a cursor there. And now I can just delete that extra little dash. And I also see that clipping happen actually because I named it oddly here. Same thing there. So let's grab all those as well, like this. And then I don't think we actually did anything with this name, but just in case we ever needed it, let's remove it so it's consistent. There we go. All right, so that's working correctly. We've got our CSS mostly done, I think. So let's jump over to the JavaScript. Now let me zoom all the way back out so we can kind of see what's going to happen here. First of all, let's get rid of this. And at the top of the document, I'm just going to grab reference to several things we're going to need. And there's several ways you could do something like this, but I've just grabbed the review slider. That's the actual div that holds all the reviews. That's going to move left and right. I've grabbed review buttons and access to all of those. So those are our side buttons here. And then I've spread into an array both our reviews, which are individual reviews, and our indicators, which are all of these. We're going to set an event listener on each of these. We could also do it just for the whole container and only set one. That's probably a better way. But this is the way I had it set up. So if you want to change that, make a request in the community improvements branch. Now here we're going to have a bunch of event listeners. We'll grab our review buttons here and then just loop over them. So for each of these, we're going to grab our button and say button.add event listener. We're going to listen for a click. And then each time it's clicked, we're going to pass it to a function called handle review button click. Now we do need to write that. So let's come up here and write that here. So we'll say function like that. We need to take in an event because we actually need to figure out which one we clicked. Now the first thing we're going to do is actually set a variable up here that will be a let variable. And this is going to be just a Boolean is moving. We want to limit the user from clicking multiple times and kind of messing up the timing of everything. So we're going to basically say if it is moving, then basically just return. And then the first thing we need to do is actually set is moving back to true or to true for the first time. Now I also need to keep track of which one I'm on, and we can do that with another variable here. We're going to just call this current index. And we're going to set this equal to 1 by default. Why 1? Well, we're technically on the second item in our array because we duplicated again the last review at the beginning. So we passed in that event. Let's go ahead and grab the current target. That would be the button it's set on, .id, and I need to know if it equals next. Now my font here sets 3 equal signs to look like that, so that's why it's showing up like that. Same thing with this arrow. This is just an equal sign and this greater than sign. Just so that's not confusing, that's what that's doing. What we need to do is say if it's the next, which means it's the right arrow, then we want the current index to increment. Otherwise, we want it to decrement. So current index will decrement. So this again is one of those ternaries, so that's the check. And then here is what happens if it's true, and here's what happens if it's false, if spacing it out like that is helpful. Then we want to run a function we're going to call move slider. So let's move that slider. Let's come up here, function move slider. We're going to grab our reviews slider. That's the div that holds all those again. We're going to grab the style.transform. We're going to set this in backticks then to translate x. It'll be negative, and then this is a template string here. We want our current index times 100, and then outside of this, percent. So in other words, move it 100% that way. Now, if we did this correctly, I should be able to click over here and nothing happens. Well, that is the definition of not doing it correctly. Let's first of all just make sure that we actually have reference to these reviews buttons. And I'm not seeing anything in here, which means probably another weird naming convention. So review right here. What did I call those things? Review button. It's not, but what I do see happening here is I've hoisted it, but I didn't set it as a type of module, which I do want to do. Let's come back up this way. And let's console log that one more time. There we go. Okay, so that's, I think, the only problem. What I should have done is click. All right, there we go. So now it's sliding over that way. Now the problem is, since I said if it had a is moving attribute set to true, you weren't allowed to click again. Now I can only click once. So we're going to have to make some adjustments there. Now the reason I set that as a type of module is so that way it loads after the body, even though it's been hoisted to the top of the document. Before we change out that is moving Boolean, let's go ahead and show the active indicators. So let's write another function, call that show active indicator. And basically every time we move the slider, that's what we want to do. So function show active indicator. Here I've got my indicators up above. I want to say .for each. We'll just call it IDN for indicator. So end.classlist.remove. And I want to remove any classes of active. Now, so far, that's not going to do a whole lot aside from remove it. So we then need to go back in and add an active class. Now, this is a little odd here, but follow me. We've actually got several different possibilities. So I'm going to set a let variable called active indicator. And then let's write some if statements. So I'm going to say if the current index equals 0. So in other words, it's the very first item in my array, which is a duplicate of my last review, or the current index equals reviews.length minus 2, because I never duplicated these indicators, I only duplicated the reviews. So I actually need to base it off of which review I'm showing and then subtract an extra one for my indicators. So if that's the case, this would be technically either image is going to be my last review. Then I want the active indicator to be equal to indicators.length minus 1. So show the last indicator as active. Let's do an else if here. And here we'll say if current index equals reviews.length minus 1. So if it's the last item in my string of reviews, which is technically a duplicate of my very first review, or the current index is equal to 1, which again is the first item in my review, but it skips past that duplicated last. All right, hopefully that's making sense. Then I want the active indicator to be equal to 0. Finally, for all the normal use cases, I just want the active indicator to be equal to current index minus 1. And now I can come down here and say indicators, and then grab that right index there, .classlist.add active. All right, so if we did that correctly, I should be able to come over here and click, and there we go, it slides right there. Now, every single time we slide, we're going to listen for an event that is going to be a transition event. So let's come down here and let's add another event listener. Now, before we take off that is moving and worry about all of that, let's actually just do event listeners for all of those indicators. In fact, let me just duplicate this right here because it's going to look very similar, except I want my indicators. And then we'll call this end, like that, for indicator. And then this will be handle indicator, click. Let's grab this up this way. Handle review button click. We're actually going to copy this down. And a lot of this is going to look very similar. If it's moving, I want to set it to return. I want to set is moving to true. And then all I have to do is come in here and say current index equals indicators. So grabbing my array of indicators, dot index of the e.target. And then I'm going to tack just one onto the end of that. So if I did this correctly, I should be able to click here and it jumps all the way there. Should be able to click here and it does nothing because we haven't taken off is moving to set that back to false. All right, so for the final and kind of important piece of magic, let's add one more event listener down here on our actual reviews slider. So this add event listener will be on transition end. We have a transition on that, so we can just listen for that, and every time a transition ends, we can fire off this event. So let me just console.log to show you what we're doing here. Fired. All right, so now we know whether it fired or not. Oops. So if I come here and I click, there we go, now it's fired. But notice it didn't happen until it finished that transition. So it swings and then stops. All right, and then it fires. So that's what we're going to listen to, and we're going to figure out whenever it ends, we want to then look at the index and decide what to do. So when that fires, first of all, we want to set is moving to false. And that will actually allow us to keep coming over here and just click and click and click. But if I try to click, it's not going to let me, which means it won't break our JavaScript. So that's good. Next, I want to say if current index is equal to 0, so if it's the very first item, which is my duplicated last review, then I want to set the current index to be equal to reviews.length minus 2. In other words, I want to be looking at the exact same review, but I want you to jump in my string of reviews so that it looks like an infinite slider. Then I need to actually set my reviews slider here, .style.transition, and we're just going to change the duration here. And we'll just change it to something like 1 millisecond. So in other words, you're not going to see this move. And then we'll just return here, move slider. Now the reason I'm returning it is it's going to jump totally out of this event listener and just run the move slider. If we did this correctly, if I move over here, we go here, it's actually jumped, and then it should jump to this one right here. Now let's copy this down like this, and let's look at another possibility. So if current index equals reviews.length minus 1, so if it's the last item in the array, which is my duplicated first review, then I want to change this current index to 1, and all the rest of that is going to be the same. You could compress that a little bit more if you want to. I'll leave that to you. And then review slider, the standard would be to set the transition duration back to 300 milliseconds. So if we did that correctly here, and let's zoom out just so we can see what's happening, I should be able to click over this way. When I get to this last one, it technically jumps all the way back, but it looks like it's just an infinite slider. But you can see here now I've got all those stacked back out this way. If I come here, same kind of thing. It actually jumps to the very end, and now all the other ones are off to the left over here. So all we're doing is basically creating an illusion that when I hit this, it's going to immediately jump, remove that duration so that it's real quick. Now that leaves us with one final thing, which is to come back in here to our overflow of hidden, and here we're going to remove that. Let's look again for another one of those. That one's still on, and here we go. Now if I zoom back in, right here. I should be able to come in here, and as I click on these, it should just look like an infinite slider. I can also click on any of these indicators and it jumps to the right position every single time, loops around when it needs to, and protects from people clicking way too fast to break my JavaScript. There's a lot involved in a little slider like this, and I hope that just kind of working through it from design to then actually styling it out with CSS and now getting functionality working with JavaScript has been a big help for you. Well, don't go anywhere because next time we're going to go ahead and finalize this design and get it ready for production. I will catch you in that video. Thanks for watching. Happy coding.